In the opening of the epic, Gilgamesh is portrayed as an exceptional individual with an undeniable charm. His birth, ancestry, and striking appearance set him apart from the masses in Uruk, and grant him a commanding power over his subjects. However, this power extends beyond political dominance as a tyrant, as Gilgamesh's insatiable sexual appetite drives him to pursue both young women and men in the city. Such behavior oppresses his subjects who are powerless to resist his advances. With parallels to the Exodus narrative, the people cry out to the heavens for relief from Gilgamesh's grasp. The cry of the people of Uruk reached the heavens, and the gods responded by creating a being in Gilgamesh's image. This person was meant to help temper his wildness and redirect his energy towards a greater purpose. Aruru, the goddess of creation, was summoned to reenact her first creation of human beings, much like the Lord God did in Genesis. She formed a man from the dust of the ground, molding a piece of clay on the plain until he became a living being. This being was a helpmeet for Gilgamesh, not in the form of a woman, but in the form of a man created solely for his sake. True self-discovery can only be achieved in the presence of another, much like how Adam only achieved completeness with the creation of Eve. Even before their first encounter was announced, it was clear that Gilgamesh and Enkidu were destined to have an extraordinary meeting and develop a remarkable relationship. This event was recorded 1,000 years prior to the famed account in Genesis, and even before David and Jonathan's first great friendship in literature. Enkidu is truly the double of Gilgamesh, yet also his opposite and mirror image. While Gilgamesh is 2/3 divine, Enkidu is 2/3 animal, living among the beasts and unable to speak. He is a naked herbivore among the herds, yet Gilgamesh sees potential in him and knows that he must be tamed and civilized. The only way to achieve this is through the power of Eros, so Gilgamesh sends a cultic prostitute to take Enkidu to Uruk, where he can be exposed to culture, intelligence, and sexual initiation. There, Enkidu begins his journey to becoming a fully realized and civilized human being. To fully appreciate the role of Shamhat, an ancient Babylonian cultic prostitute, we must remove any filters of romantic love, Judeo-Christian morality, male lubricity, or female indignation from our imaginations. It's worth noting that there's actually no English word that accurately describes what Shamhat was. The Akkadian words translated as prostitute certainly don't mean prostitute, in our modern sense of a woman who sells herself for personal gain. Shamhat was a priestess of Ishtar, goddess of love, and lived a life dedicated to the sacred mystery of sexual union. As an incarnation of Ishtar, Shamhat used her own body to enact the cosmic marriage, and as a pure servant of Eros, she was a vessel for the force that moves the stars and drove the very essence of life itself. She was a kind of reverse nun, dedicating herself entirely to a divine cause and embodying the power of love in all its raw and elemental forms, including sexual passion. Shamhat's role was not merely physical, but spiritual as well, representing the sacred and life-giving force of the universe that permeates everything around us. The love arts is seen as a civilizing event rather than something dangerous to the social order. Shamhat's role in the Epic of Gilgamesh can be compared to the fruit Eve gave to Adam as it is portrayed in the book of Genesis. After an unbroken week of lovemaking, Enkidu sought to return to the world of animals, but they scattered at his approach. He realized that he no longer had the instinctive mind of an animal. Something within him had changed. Although he had lost his former powers, he had gained something far more valuable. Through his experience with Shamhat, his consciousness had expanded, and he had begun to know himself like never before. Enkidu discovered that he had developed the ability to understand human language, an exciting breakthrough for him. Additionally, he noticed the truth that the Lord God recognized for Adam in Genesis, that it was not good for man to be alone. In Enkidu's newfound yearning for a true and loyal friend, he discovered his true purpose and place in society. His journey toward civilization had begun, and he was eager to explore the vast potential of his newly expanded mind. Enkidu waited in front of the marriage house, resolute and unyielding. As Gilgamesh arrived, the two heroes embraced each other fiercely, their heads butting like wild bulls. Twisting through the streets and crashing into walls, they left the houses shaking in their wake. There was something beautiful about this battle, something almost erotic in its intensity. Their relationship was not just one of violence, it was an entrance into intimacy, as close to lovemaking as it was to combat. Gilgamesh and Enkidu were bound by more than just complementarity, they shared a deep love that ran through the entire epic. The word love appeared repeatedly, emphasizing the special bond they shared. From the first moment they met, their friendship blossomed into a connection that held every aspect of a true partnership. They were confidants, lovers, and brothers, sharing an intimacy that revealed itself as an essential element of their journey toward mutual understanding. Their relationship was a testament to the power of love to transform individuals, and to create a bond that defied explanation or categorization. Love and sexuality have long been a part of the story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. In David's elegy for Jonathan, one finds hints of the homoerotic characters of the friends. The words used in the elegy of Gilgamesh are unmistakably sexual and erotic, with expressions like axe of my side, support of my arm, and clothes at my feet, suggesting a closeness between friends, akin to that between lovers. The same can be seen in dreams foreshadowing Enkidu's arrival, which allude to a more intimate connection. It is clear that love, both platonic and romantic, was a driving force for this legendary duo. Before ever encountering Enkidu in combat, Gilgamesh had a dream of him that was filled with great physical tenderness. When Gilgamesh shared his dream of a meteor with his mother, she interpreted it as a sign of the powerful connection he would form with Enkidu. She said, "The boulder stands for a dear friend, a mighty hero. You will take him in your arms, embrace and caress him the way a man caresses his wife." Gilgamesh and Enkidu's friendship was so powerful that it felt like a kind of marriage, a love so strong that each one could say, as David says of Jonathan, "Thy love to me is wonderful, passing the love of women." The homoerotic nature of Gilgamesh and Enkidu's relationship is evident throughout the epic poem. Through clever wordplay involving terms such as Hasinu, axe, and Asinu, male prostitute, Kisru, celestial stone, or meteorite, and Kesru, masculine form of Kazurtu, prostitute, we are presented with a subtle, but powerful hint of the sexual undertones that exist between the two friends. This is even more evident in the numerous scenes throughout where they kiss each other's feet or share passionate embraces while sleeping in the cedar forest. Enkidu speaks of pleasure when touching Gilgamesh and hints at an intimate relationship between them that never fully manifests. Moreover, it can be argued that Gilgamesh's tyrannical reign over his city was due to an overflowing sexuality which eventually led to the creation of Enkidu as its balance. Love and sexuality are undeniably some of this masterpiece's most essential components, laying the foundation for their incredible journey together. The sexuality introduced to Enkidu by the courtesan is not connected to procreation or mortality, but rather serves as a way of distinguishing him from animals. In Gilgamesh's epic, sexuality is understood as one of the great joys of human existence and can take many forms, including both heterosexual and homosexual partnerships. Indeed, the story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu is one of extraordinary and complex love. It includes brotherhood, friendship, passionate love, and eroticism. This unique bond is also framed against reflections on the human condition in which sexuality plays an important role. Comparisons can be drawn between Gilgamesh and Enkidu, and biblical figures such as David and Jonathan. Examining similarities and differences between the two stories reveals connections between them, which were drawn from their common cultural heritage. Now let's compare both sets of literature. Comparing both sets of literature raises a number of methodological questions, particularly when it comes to comparing two texts that come from different times and production media. This is further complicated by the vastly different status of each text. The Hebrew Bible, as a foundational text for both Judaism and Christianity, has been transmitted continuously since it was written, while the Epic of Gilgamesh was born from a civilization that remained lost for over 1,000 years and has only recently been rediscovered. Moreover, the story of David and Jonathan was preserved within a religion that evolved towards monotheism, while the Epic of Gilgamesh was set in a highly complex polytheism where gods were omnipresent. Additionally, David's story was taking place during a time when the small Israelite community was beginning to experience the dawn of urban civilization and the formation of a slowly emerging monarchy in a still largely unstratified society, while the Epic of Gilgamesh presupposes a history of empires spanning centuries and millennia, against a finely hierarchical and fragmented social backdrop. Given these vastly different contexts, it begs the question of how to approach comparison without losing authenticity and trying to force meaning into the outcomes. The justification for comparison between the two literary sets lies in the fact that both are grounded in Semitic mentality and the ancient Near East world, reflecting shared common thought. Mesopotamia was an intellectual and cultural center for 3 millennia before the start of the Christian era. It influenced all the peoples of the ancient Near East, from Egypt to the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. These kingdoms did not develop in isolation but constantly received influence from the great empires of Egypt and Mesopotamia. During the writing of the books of Samuel, Judah was under Assyrian domination. It is highly probable that the Epic of Gilgamesh reached Jerusalem and was known and read in the royal court. Furthermore, the comparison is justified on literary grounds. Both texts tell the story of a deep friendship and share similar motifs and expressions, suggesting a cultural cross-pollination between the two regions. The first similarity in the construction of friendships is that of social status. In both narratives, we are faced with 4 characters who occupy the position of hero-warrior. In both cases, the combatants are attracted to each other. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the prostitute speaks to Enkidu of the strength of Gilgamesh, and from that moment, Enkidu dreams only of challenging him. In the story of David and Jonathan, just after his victory against Goliath, David is introduced to the prince, Jonathan, who has also distinguished himself in the fight against the Philistines. The friendship that is born between the two heroes is articulated identically in the two narratives. The events at the beginning are very similar. A skilled but rough warrior, unfamiliar to the king or the heir to the throne, suddenly forms a strong attachment with them and immediately becomes a duo. The two pairs will cohabit in the royal court, making great intimacy possible. In examining the friendships in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the story of David and Jonathan, it is clear that there exists a certain asymmetry in terms of social status. In both pairs, one companion is socially inferior to the other, and owes their elevation to the favor of their friend who spontaneously makes them an equal. In the Mesopotamian epic, the king, Gilgamesh, plays the main role while Enkidu occupies a less enviable position, serving as a benefactor whose death triggers Gilgamesh's quest for immortality. Similarly, in the Book of Samuel, Jonathan disappears before David, the shepherd who later became king. Jonathan's death, like Saul's, allows David to ascend to the throne of Israel. The relationships in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the story of David and Jonathan demonstrate a certain asymmetry at the level of narration. Both narratives begin with the arrival of a hero, Enkidu or David, who quickly earns the trust and friendship of a king or future king. But the dynamics of the relationships shift over time. While Enkidu becomes the king's companion, David's status is more complex. As the chosen one of God, he takes precedence over Jonathan. In the early chapters of the narrative, David seeks Jonathan's help, but later on, Jonathan asks David for protection for himself and his descendants. The structuring of the two relationships does not follow a completely parallel scheme, but they share an identical foundation: the bond between a king, or heir to the throne, and an unsurpassable friend. Both the Epic of Gilgamesh and the story of David and Jonathan emphasize the exclusivity that characterizes the deep bond between two friends, a friendship in which no one can compete, not a woman, not a third hero, not even a goddess. The profound attachment between the two men is not motivated by any ulterior motives, but instead manifests from the first encounter as a kind of love at first sight. Both narratives recognize the royalty of the main character openly by the other. Enkidu, by praising Gilgamesh, says, "Your mother, the goddess Nisan, made you stronger and braver than any mortal, and rightly has Enlil granted you the kingship." Similarly, Jonathan openly acknowledges the royalty to which Yahweh destines his friend David. "May the Lord be with you, as he has been with my father." 1 Samuel 20 verse 13. The conclusion of an alliance or friendship pact is a common theme in both works, but it is more developed in the first book of Samuel. Both works also contain scenes of physical contact between friends, such as kissing, hugging, and holding hands. The emotional farewell between the companions is described with expressions linked to femininity, hinting at the sexual nature of the relationships between the two men. However, the introduction of female imagery is not solely for that purpose. Both works qualify the strength of the feeling that unites the friends, using kinship vocabulary, describing their bond as that of brothers. This choice of words implies a deeper sense of longevity and commitment. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, we see sexual symbols in Gilgamesh's dreams indicating the arrival of Enkidu. The journey to the cedar forest also depicts a close bond between the two heroes, as they lay down together holding hands. The dream that they share suggests a deep connection that goes beyond friendship. Similarly, in the story of David and Jonathan, the use of the verb to desire suggests an erotic and possibly sexual dimension to their relationship. There are also instances where this dimension is implied, such as during their first encounter when Jonathan undresses before David. Although the gesture expresses submission, it raises questions about whether Jonathan needed to undress completely to acknowledge David's royalty. The elegies of Gilgamesh and David emphasize that the departed companion was much more than just a confidant or an ally. The death of the friend becomes a necessary element for understanding the strength of the bond between the pairs, and the grief of the survivor is undoubtedly an expression of a lost love that they have not felt for anything or anyone else. Paradoxically, the death of the friend highlights both the fragility and solidity of the love shared between the companions. The survivor will never forget their deceased friend, which underscores the lasting impact and importance of their relationship. Comparing the stories of Gilgamesh and Enkidu with David and Jonathan reveals intriguing parallels, yet it is important to acknowledge their distinct differences. Both narratives portray a profound relationship between two men, marking a bond that goes beyond the protagonist to signify strong intimacy and unbridled trust between them. Moreover, the death of the companion in both narratives only reinforces the intense value of the friendship. Such a relationship is not typical among ordinary mortals but reserved for male heroes within the context of the royal court, as per the ancient codes. Despite such similarities, the love that emerges between the protagonists is believed to arise from divine will, as both the epic poet and biblical writer imply. The use of marital metaphors and erotic images highlights the vital complementarity of the companions, and constructs a prototype of heroic and masculine friendship that evolves between an ideal king and a necessary confidant, replete with a strong dose of eroticism. Given such parallels, one wonders if there is any literary dependence between both narratives. It is unlikely that the story of David and Jonathan influenced the Epic of Gilgamesh, yet the opposite may be plausible. As fragments of the epic were found in Megiddo, the author of the 1 Samuel narrative may have been inspired by it, integrating its motifs to reinforce the importance of the founding king of the dynasty of Judah. Indeed, David represents the archetype of the king in the ancient Near East, a brave warrior, protected by the gods, daring, beautiful, and capable, and loved by those surrounding him. In comparison to the story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu, the relationship between David and Jonathan seems more of a love story than found in the Bible by itself, which may have been revised in later retellings to obscure the erotic elements it contains. While the concept of homosexuality is inappropriate to apply to ancient Near Eastern thought, the dynamic between David and Jonathan suggests a singular and precise sexual relationship between two men, often loaded with the idea of role transgression, as one of the men has to assume the passive role reserved for women. While these texts do not primarily focus on sex, they argue instead that there is a love that clearly involves erotic aspects. Hence, while there is the potential to romanticize non-sexual friendships, an erotic reading of the David and Jonathan relationship finds solid support in the texts. Nevertheless, it is interesting to note that Christian and Jewish exegetes often view the story of David and Jonathan as not depicting a homosexual relationship, suggesting such readings detract from David's character. Regardless of how one interprets the story of David and Jonathan, the comparative analysis with the Epic of Gilgamesh highlights the fact that, The ancient Near East had a different outlook on love, that was beyond the conventional comprehension of modern-day people.